Afternoon or morning, everybody, depending where you're dialing in from. My name is Scott Benj. As St. John said, I'm Head of Data Advisory Services for DTSQUARED. I have a colleague of mine, Sam Foltin, who's a data management consultant with DTSQUARED. We want to talk to you today around DBT metadata and data management. So Sam, if you can jump on to the next slide. So the agenda for today is talking around the value of good data and overcoming common data challenges. We want to talk to you around the common data management areas that you should consider, and importantly, looking at leading technologies such as DBT and how that works with data management capabilities. Next slide, please, Sam. So what are the common data challenges that we're seeing? Some examples are on the screen here. Lack of control and standards over your data, no clear data ownership, poor or unknown data quality, a very common one, lack of golden sources for data, limited knowledge of the data's location, varying definitions for the same data, lack of clear reporting and analytics strategy, and the ability to join up data across different siloed applications, as well as inappropriate data access controls. We're going to talk to how DBT is relevant for some of those challenges. So what's the value, the business value of having good data? And there's a few things just to highlight here. Really, if you have got good quality data, this is going to support better reporting for the organization and therefore better decision making. This also will support reduced costs if you've got better control over your overall data architecture and data landscape. Potential for increased revenue derived from better analytics and reporting information. And of course, there's often compliance with regulations, with a common one in the EU, such as GDPR or Solvency II or other typical regulations. And also getting control over your data allows you to have better mitigation of risks for your business. Next slide, please, Sam. Data management pillars. We all have probably slightly different names for these pillars, but hopefully a lot of these will resonate with you. These are what we typically look at as a data management consultancy. You want to start with an overall data management strategy. Then you want to put some sort of data management program in place. As you would with any sort of program for an organization, you've got to have some sort of structure or governance in place. The foundational pillars that we like to look at: data quality, data architecture, and importantly, data governance, which we're going to focus on today, and how we stand up those capabilities and how we use technology such as DBT to support those foundational pillars. And importantly, obviously, as mentioned, is the technology architecture, the tool set, the infrastructure, networks, etc., that you need to support these foundational capabilities of governance, quality, and architecture. So next one, please, Sam. So what are the key benefits of data governance? And just a few points here. Obviously, organizations collect millions of bits of data every day. And as we know, with advances in technology, the Internet of Things, the potential for quantum computing, et cetera, we're only going to start to get more and more data coming into organizations. And all of this data is stored neatly in tables and databases, but often it isn't visible to the business. So data governance helps you organize that data, raises its visibility, and ensures that it is fit for purpose for the business. So this helps support easier access, common understanding of that data, potential for generating data maps, which Sam will show you a little bit later on, and consistent compliance, and this supports a key part of your overall data management framework. So the next slide, thanks, Sam. Actually, I think that's handing over to you now.
Yeah, it is. Thank you very much for providing the data management, data governance context, Scott. So to continue, as Scott said, just maintaining control over your data and having that data governance in place is very important to achieving these benefits that we mentioned. Now, what you might find in organizations which don't deal with this very often is they would initially go and try to use sort of general purpose built tools, something maybe from the Microsoft Office suite to capture information about their data and capture the processes that users have to follow. Now, if you do this, I think you're gonna struggle, and you're gonna find challenges fairly quickly on. One of the reasons why is you might generate massive amounts of files, all with different information, and you might start kind of finding these in different repositories all over the place, or just the fact that not everything is consolidated in one place is going to make it more difficult to find. And so the market has seen this challenge, and they've adapted by introducing, a couple of companies have introduced various data governance tools. We're working with a couple. Generally, they're fairly similar. They offer, the same sort of functionality. Major differences come in terms of what they integrate with and maybe some other features. But generally, the reason why people do purchase these tools and why they use them is they come with a set of benefits. One of them being that they help you sort of increase your operational efficiency. And this comes down primarily to the fact that what these tools do is they let you sort of map out your data infrastructure, not just what we refer to as physical data, which in normal speak is columns, tables, schemas, and so on, but also lets users document the meaning of that data in more sort of business-friendly terms. So I don't necessarily have to go in and see the list of my columns with all their technical names. What I would do is have someone capture the fact that, oh, well, this is customer data, and this is supplier data, and so on. And the fact that we kind of interconnect all of this information together in these tools lets other users come in and easily find exactly the type of data they want to. The other benefit is enhanced decision making. And I think again this comes down to the previous point. If we make more data readily available, or more information about our data readily available to users, then statistically they're more likely to make better decisions. So it all comes down to the availability of information. We also, with these tools, what we do is we raise the profile of data, or raise the awareness of data to users. So instead of having data be the sort of technical thing that business users don't necessarily want to deal with too much, what these tools do is they kind of embrace this cooperation between users and have everyone chip in. So even though I'm not necessarily a technical user, I can come in and describe the type of data in the language I understand into this tool. And then again, other people can come in and make the dots connect. They can say, oh, well, yes, I do work with these columns, and they are in effect what you described in your own terminology. So let's link these together, and let's help users understand what is where. And then finally, they help disseminate information about data quality to users who wouldn't normally see it. So again, data quality is one of those things where you need to write complex queries, could be SQL or something else, to determine the scores. And that's why it's again seen as a primarily something that a technical person would deal with. What these tools do is they provide you with sort of like a main dashboard that is business friendly, and they let you integrate with other tools like data quality tools. So business users can, with a couple of clicks, come and see information like data quality about the data they're using without any technical expertise. So we talked about the importance of capturing information about your data. One of the very valuable components of information about your data is lineage. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with lineage, since this is one of the features that DBT provides. Just to recap, when we talk about lineage, we refer to information about what's the life cycle of a particular set of data. It originates in some source systems. It then passes through maybe some staging tables, maybe some additional logic is applied to it to get the values we need. And then finally, it feeds into a field and report. So this is the information we want to capture. One of the reasons why I want to capture this is it greatly assists us with root cause analysis in case we do encounter a data issue. So think about, you identify that a report you've been supplying to a regulator comes up and is returned because the data is wrong. Well, what are you going to do? Hopefully, you're not going to start figuring out where that data was obtained just then. Hopefully, you're going to have some sort of lineage information capture ready. And what you can do is go back a couple of hops and see exactly what fed the faulty column. And from there, you have a good suspect for where to deploy your remediation effort to. Additionally, Lineage helps us not duplicate infrastructure. So we've worked with clients who have had massive data infrastructure, partly because they weren't aware of all the data all the data they have. And when a new report request came in by business users, then instead of reusing already built infrastructure which contained the data that the report needed, the IT staff will come in and rebuild some of that infrastructure because they just weren't aware there wasn't a good method of capturing that information. And then finally, the last reason I want to mention for for making the case for Lineage is that you do increase your conformance with some regulations. We work with the in the financial industry sector, and the regulation we get to see a lot is BCBS 239. And one of the requirements of BCBS 239 is companies do have to, or banks do have to, understand how their data flows throughout the systems and where does it change effectively, what is the lineage. So capturing this, makes you proactive in terms of complying to these regulations, even assuming that these sort of requirements are only going to be included more and more. So why doesn't everyone capture lineage? I'd imagine it's because of the sheer, difficulty of doing so. There's a couple of challenges that organizations face. One of them being that there's simply, vast amount of data infrastructure that we have to document. If you count the amount of columns and tables you might use in your daily operation, you're probably going to count thousands if you look into the back end. So, it really does kind of introduce you to the complexity just in terms of sheer numbers of assets you have to capture. The other challenge is the way that the transformation logic is stored. Generally it's stored in some sort of query. It could be SQL or something else. But if you want to interpret it in the way humans do, then you have to get a person. Well, I mean, there are tools for it, but you have to get someone in to kind of interpret that data and then figure out, do the connections and plot that manually somewhere, unless you use these tools which we're going to talk about. And then finally, the data infrastructure is constantly evolving. So it could be either a matter of transformations being amended, changed, or whether it's just the nature of your data infrastructure, which is going to be that as requirements come in, then we build in more and more complex stuff. So there's always going to be things to keep on documenting, which makes it a difficult challenge to achieve getting your entire lineage captured. So we've been thinking about solutions, and working with dbt, we noticed that one of the things dbt does really well is it interprets the SQL you write inside, and it actually is able to generate these lineage diagrams from how data flows between tables. So on one hand, we have these data governance tools which introduce us to all these benefits I mentioned earlier, and on the other we have dbt, which might help us automate the process of capturing lineage, thus skipping over these challenges we just mentioned. So I want to show you what we've done in this effort to sort of automate capturing lineage. So first thing, if we go into dbt, you can see that we have a couple of scripts here. We have a script for creating two views. One is stage customers and stage loans, and the other one is a table called customers. We create these artifacts in Snowflake. So again, if you just look at the screen, then we have customers tables here in Snowflake, and we do have those two views in here as well, with the relevant columns. So what we decided to do was use one of the data governance tools called Collibra. And Collibra comes with this sort of out-of-the-box functionality, which lets you point it to your database instance, including Snowflake, type in the credentials, and then what Collibra is going to do is it's going to scan basics about that database. So what are the tables and columns inside? And if we run that, then you'll see once I click on the schema I just captured, I do have a list of those automatically ingested tables. So we have our customers table over there with the different columns. And when I scroll down, you'll see the two bottom rows is stage customers and stage loans, which are the two views we also generated using dbt. But in the third column, you'll see that they're considered a table by Collibra. So already we introduced a little bit of inaccuracy just using that automatic ingestion mechanism. So what we've decided to do is we've looked into dbt and we found these two files which were of use. One is the catalog JSON file, and another one is the manifest JSON file. So if we look into the actual the structure of the file, starting with the catalog file, one of the fields we'll notice in there is it gives you a type for every artifact in there. So from this we can determine that the customers table was in fact a table, And if we scroll down to these stage customers and stage loan, we'll see that it has a type view. So already we can use that information to help us enrich the information in the data governance tool. When I now look into the manifest file, you'll see that we have a field called compiled SQL, which gives us the SQL codes used to generate the values in our tables. But also there's this parent map information, which for every table lets us see what feeds that table and where does the data from that table eventually go to. So we can capture this lineage information just using the information that's already in DBT. So what we've done is we've developed a custom accelerator for Collibra, which lets you upload those two files, manifest and catalog. Collibra kind of uses that accelerator to interpret the data. As you can see, it automatically updates the information. So that customers table remained a table, but these two views that we have down here changed from what was previously a table to now the correct interpretation, which is the view. And so if we click on these, you'll see some basic information, such as, again, you'll see the columns inside, and Collibra ran some profile on the data, so we see information about that. But if we go into the diagram functionality, then because we ingested that lineage, we can generate these views where we see, okay, that stage customer view is feeding data into our customers table. Additionally, we can focus on the customers table and see that, in fact, it's not only being fed by that one view, that stage customers, but it's also being fed by the stage loans view. So we get a complete picture. Additionally, you saw that compiled SQL field in manifest file. We also ingest that against every table. So if I am a technical user and I want to find out information about what specific transformation is being used to populate this table, I can just come in here into my data governance tool and find all the information I need from this one portal. The other benefit of using these data governance tools is, it introduces you to discoverability. And discoverability refers to a couple of things, primarily the ability to find data quickly. So if I'm a business user and I know, let's say I need to construct some sort of marketing analysis report that's going to determine, the effect of customer demographics on sales, maybe one of the fields I need to use is the postcode field of my customers. I might not know exactly what the name of that column is in database or what database it's used in, but because we capture the data at all these different levels, what I can do is search for a concept I'm familiar with, something super simple like customer. I'll go and find customer in this tool, and then the next thing I can do, since all the information in these tools is interconnected, from customer I can then navigate to, let's say, customer address. And from customer address, I'm just one click away from customer postcode or customer zip code. And once I get there, I can see all the information about that data element, as in where is it stored, which columns and tables, and who has responsibility over that data. Which brings me on to my next point, which is the ability to kind of figure out immediately who is it you got to get in touch with in case you have an issue with the data. So if there's something I don't understand about a particular column or data element or whatever it is that's stored in there, the odds are I'll find someone who is either an owner, a steward, or an SME for that asset. So what I can do is simply use this tool to figure out who that is and then reach out to them with a question or with a concern that I have. And then finally, one of really powerful functionalities these tools tend to provide is the ability to they call it shop for data, which effectively means, I go through this process of finding the data I'm interested in. The next thing I do is I start adding this data into my basket like you would with any online store. You add in a couple of tables or data elements, and what you do then is you click a checkout button, which prompts you to type in, why you need that data and how long you need that data for. And once you submit that request, then whoever is accountable for that data, again, probably an owner, but could be a steward or someone else, they get a notification telling them that a request for access to the data under their responsibility has been raised, and now they have the ability to review the request and either grant access or reject the request. Now, we're not fully there yet where these tools are able to grant access by themselves. The point where they're at right now is they let you kind of keep a log of what data was requested for what reason and any associated information with that. If you want to actually provision the data, then you'd expect someone to go and do it outside of these tools. But we'll talk about the aspirations later on. So there's other, I mean, we covered the major benefits, the primary ones I wanted to focus on in this presentation, but there's other benefits of these data governance tools. Unfortunately, I don't really think I have the time to go through these, but this can be, part of our Q&A in a couple of minutes, so we can talk through these later. Before I summarize, one last thing I wanted to talk about was where we think these tools are heading. So what's the future state of data governance tooling? I think one of the areas, where a lot of focus is being placed on is that lineage or automated lineage. Right now, as you see, people like us have to go through the process of kind of develop our integrations so that, we reduce the level of like manual process that we need to undergo to load this data in. But what we do see is these tooling companies, they work on one of two things. Either they're working on enhancing their integrations with other data, with other tools which are able to scan the lineage, or they try to build this functionality directly into their tool. So as you see, that tool I was showing you, Collibra, it's at a stage where it can scan for what columns and tables exist in your system, but we're not there yet where we could rely on it fully capturing the actual transformations. So I think this is one of the directions they're heading. Another observation I've made is around the provisioning of data. So as I just mentioned 2 slides ago, one of the functionalities of these tools is that not only can you find data that you're interested in, but you can directly raise a request for that data in the tool and then have that be assessed by whoever is accountable. As I said, one of the things where we think we're going to see improvements is going to be having the tools kind of integrate even further or provide more seamless functionality so you don't have to jump in between different environments, and have you automatically provision that data from the tool as long as the request is granted. So there's no need for jumping between different tools or environments. And then finally, I think the other direction we're heading is referring or closely knit to data quality. Right now, data governance tools themselves don't really have capability to assess data quality. Some are able to do some basic profiling, so they can tell you what the average value is in a column, what are the min-max values, and so on. But one of the things customers are really interested in when they see the data governance tool is seeing those data quality scores show up, because it introduces information that users haven't seen previously to them, and it makes users more confident in the data they use. So I think the next step we're going to see is more development in the data quality area in terms of data governance tools. And again, we're either going to see more integration between data governance tools and data quality tools, or we're going to see these data governance tools come up with their own method of assessing DQ directly in the tools. So to summarize, I'd like you to leave with 4 points in mind. One of them being that data governance and data management is not really an IT task. Yes, it is concerned with data, but having good control and understanding of your data is really beneficial to the entire business, and it should have senior stakeholder buy-in. The other point is that people often talk about data governance, but really there's more to it. As we saw, there's the entire area of data management, which constitutes a different pillar that Scott mentioned. And it's just as important to pay attention to data architecture or data quality as it is to data governance. We think there's a lot of people who could benefit from looking into data governance tools. If you don't use one, then have a look on the market. And finally, if you do already have a data governance tool, then think about the different integrations that you could benefit from if you were to sort of make these tools communicate together and extract information from one tool and present it all to business users in the other. So with that being said, thank you very much for your attention. That covers everything for today.